I'll be able to share my presentation. Okay, great. So, like I said, it's a pleasure. Alejandro Salgado from the Puerto Rico Public Housing Administration. I wanted to share with you guys the different events, emergencies we faced in the past few years and our recovery efforts so far. So, PHA roles and responsibilities. Well, we are the agency of the government of Puerto Rico responsible for addressing the housing needs of low-income families, managing the public housing resources effectively, and providing safe housing to tenants, and also supporting and promoting the economic and social self-sufficiency of public housing residents and HCV programs, participants, sorry. PHA, we have 332 public housing projects all throughout Puerto Rico in all municipalities except Culebra. That's 5,772 residential buildings, 53,775 housing units. The recent events, Hurricane Maria. I know we've all heard of Hurricane Maria. Devastating effects. A total of 326 projects were damaged somehow by Hurricane Maria. Approximately 130 dwelling units suffered significant damages and are currently uninhabitable. 5 projects were severely damaged by floodwaters. About 300 projects have roof and paint damages. In November 2017, damages were estimated on 120 million and increased to 395 million by May 2018. Today, damages are still being quantified. PHA has been claiming damages under FEMA's public assistance program for emergency works and permanent repairs. All emergency-related projects have been obligated or in the process of reimbursement. Although all sites, all 332 developments have been inspected, only 5 projects have obligations for permanent repairs, and currently a sampling approach is being implemented. So here we are sharing some details on the different categories under FEMA's public assistance that have been obligated to date. So we want to talk a bit more about FEMA's statistical sampling methodology. On September 2020, FEMA agreed to pursue a sampling process for PHA's 6,568 facilities. The idea is for a single grant to be obligated for the repair of all projects, obviously excluding the 5 projects or PWs that have been obligated to date. Residential and administrative buildings and basketball courts will be included in the sampling, although other facilities such as recreation areas, high-rise and miscellaneous buildings and site exteriors are to be directly costed. Our insurance claim. In 2017, PHA claimed damages to public housing inventory to our insurance company. Since efforts were not able to proceed, in 2018, we had to file a legal suit against our insurance company, claiming damages to our inventory up to policy limits, which is close to $2 billion. Today, about 4 years after the event, only 33 projects have been inspected by the insurance company, and the insurer has made partial payments totaling only $8 million. So we've had our difficulties obligating funds by FEMA and receiving insurance proceeds from our insurance company. the recent earthquakes. A total of 135 projects were affected by the seismic activity. 371 housing units are currently uninhabitable. 9 projects have structural damages. Something we've had to face is that projects in 42 municipalities had some type of damage, but FEMA only included 14 municipalities in the disaster declaration for the earthquakes. So we are unable to request FEMA funding for those projects outside of those 14, even though they had some type of damage. Today, damages are still being quantified, but the initial estimates total around $31 million. PHA is also claiming damages under FEMA public assistance for the emergency works and permanent repairs necessary to address the damages caused by the earthquake, sorry. The estimated emergency works are about 5.1 million. The estimated amount for permanent repairs is close to $30 million. And damages are being captured by PHA and reported to FEMA. 22 sites have been inspected today. We are also having difficulty with the insurance company for that recent natural disaster, in which we have claimed $31.2 million in damages to a total of 135 properties throughout the islands which were affected by the seismic activity. The insurance initial offer for 5 properties, which is the only offer we've received to date, is $724,000, which clearly makes it difficult to address the damages and make the repairs that are necessary to our housing inventory. Our recovery effort, our upcoming projects. From the 5 projects that have been obligated today by FEMA, previously mentioned, two of the projects were 2 public housing projects in the municipality of Ciales here in Puerto Rico, which were significantly damaged by Hurricane Maria due to the flooding. FEMA has obligated $18.7 million to relocate these 2 public housing projects, and we are currently working with the demolition and new construction of 110 housing units. This is a model of the projects we are working on in Ciales to be able to relocate the residents of these 2 public housing developments. The other 3 projects that have been obligated by FEMA to date are 3 small housing projects in Santa Isabel, Mayagüez, and Aguadilla, and we share here the information. These are the only projects that have been obligated today, almost 4 years after the event. I must state that through CDBG-DR funds, we will be able to cover the cost share, the 10% cost share to be funded for the Hurricane Maria emergency or disaster declaration. Earthquakes. We are currently estimating that these works will be necessary in 6 public housing projects. Here we share the information of the investments, the capital that will be necessary to be able to address those damages to our housing inventory due to the recent earthquakes. But now we continue with our new development plans, even though we are facing the problem of being able to address the damages to our inventory due to the recent disasters, due to that we have not received today the necessary funds by FEMA or our insurance company. But still, we continue with our new development plans. We have 6 new mixed finance projects in the pipeline. I must say that these projects will be using CDBG-DR funds. The Department of Housing will be setting aside $250 million in a GAP program to be able to cover the necessities to finance these new developments and continue with our new development plans, even though the damage and the impacts of the recent events. Also, this new developments will be using LIHTC, 9% LIHTC, and we are considering also using 4%. What are we doing right now? We still continue with our modernization projects, I must say. Also, COVID-19 has delayed our modernization projects, but we continue are currently rehabilitating 4 public housing developments in the island. Here are the information that we are sharing. We are currently, in addition to the mixed new developments that we have in the pipeline, we are currently working in construction of 2 new mixed finance projects. That's one in Caguas and one in San Juan, Puerto Tierra. I must say that the Jose Gautier Benitez project in Caguas is the first project in Puerto Rico to use CDBG-DR funds as part of the GAP program that has been developed and that I have mentioned earlier. Challenges and opportunities. Like I said, one of the main challenges that Puerto Rico has faced and is currently facing after the recent natural disasters are FEMA's public assistance, being able to move forward with our claim and receive the necessary funds to repair our housing inventory due to extensive process changes in the methodologies, and also taking in consideration that since unfortunately we've had multiple disasters, there is some disaster overlapping in the claims, the damages that are due to the hurricanes and the earthquakes. Also, our insurance company, we face many issues being able to receive insurance proceeds to invest and repair our inventory. I mentioned we are currently in a legal action requesting up to policy limits. Unfortunately, more than close to 4 years later, we still have not received the necessary insurance money to be able to repair our inventory. And the same problems we've had with FEMA, we are having with the insurance company. I mentioned earlier, to date, only 33 projects from 332 have been inspected by our insurance company. So the damage capture process has been very difficult for us. But potential opportunities, funding. We are trying to maximize the CDBG-DR funds that the island has received to be able to work with new developments using that GAP funding from CDBG-DR. We are looking for opportunities for LIHTC, using our capital funds to continue with our plans, looking into the future. And also using the hazard mitigation programs, we are going to be able to to have projects that are more resilient and threaten our other structures, so we won't have to face this in the future. So those are the potential opportunities we have in front of us. We continue to work every day to be able to attend the necessities of our public housing residents. With this, I finish my presentation. I appreciate your time.
Thank you, Alejandro, and thank you for your work and Puerto Rican Housing Authority's work in trying to provide safe and stable housing through such insurmountable odds and unfortunate disasters. It really defined what the word resilience means. Just a reminder, we're going to be saving Q&As till the end of the 3 presentations. So if you have any questions, you can enter them in the chat or save them and ask them at the end of the presentations. Next up, we have Alan Issa from the Houston Housing Authority, co-presenting with Bill Bryant, Energy Manager from the Houston Housing Authority.
Great. Can you all see the screen?
Yes.
Okay, great. So thank you, Joshua and Camille and CLPHA for giving us the opportunity to be here and speak about countering the climate crisis. It's a great pleasure to be here. So as Joshua introduced, I'm Alan Issa. I'm a policy analyst with the Houston Housing Authority. I also have Bill Bryant next to me. He'll be talking later regarding some of the things that we've been working on. He's a 35-year plus employee here at the HHA. So he's an expert master in a lot of the energy related stuff. And I also want to thank Harris County for being diligent for our COVID vaccines. Both of us, including and many of our employees, as well as our public housing and voucher holders, have been vaccinated. So I want to thank Harris County for being diligent and working on that. Okay, so today I'll be talking about green energy for public housing through ESCO, EPC, and other methods. So a little bit of a different take and approach from what what Alejandro just presented on. So a quick agenda. So I'll provide an HHA overview, who we are. I'm going to update you guys on the new Green Deal that's come out recently on the Hill, talk about our strategy and what we've been doing in terms of green energy and the usage of our HUD ESCO APC program, and then rent reduction incentive and other projects as well. So about us, HHA, we are located in Houston, Texas. We are the 4th largest city in the United States of America. And depending on how the census, the 2020 census results come out, we may overtake or surpass Chicago and become the 3rd largest city in the US. So we're pretty excited. Currently, we own and operate 26 low rent public housing program developments, serving over 3,300 units and 7,500 individuals. We also operate approximately 2,700 units under our tax credit, RAD, and PBRA programs as well. And we also have about 18,000 voucher holders, or we have 18,000 vouchers serving over 45,000 individuals. So that's who we are. So I'm gonna provide a quick overview of the Green New Deal. So affordable housing and need for environmental reform. So like roads and bridges, affordable housing is a long-term asset that connects communities and families to resources and opportunities. And as we all know, working in this industry, that many of our existing stock of affordable housing is aging and is in need of repair and have disproportionately impacted low-income and minority households throughout the United States of America. Basically, updating outdated housing stock can also create high-paying jobs and reduce energy costs for us housing authorities, as well as the residents themselves. And in assisted housing, less energy consumption reduces government subsidy costs and help preserve long-term investments by reducing operating costs and improving the financial stability of our properties. And also investments in renewable energy and resilient building systems make housing less reliant on traditional electric grid, enabling energy providers to continue providing services to vulnerable populations during natural disasters. This is something that Texas has yet to focus on. With the recent winter storm, we've seen a lot of our faults and major disasters of our electric grid and other necessary resources that we need. from that, and then updating energy and water systems can create healthier homes for residents and help them succeed. So outside of the housing needs, there are other costs associated as well for many of our low-income households. So according to a study done by the American Council of Energy Efficient, median energy burden of low-income multifamily household is 2.3 times higher than that of other multifamily households. And also, the median energy burden of Black households is 43% higher than that of white non-Hispanic households. Speaking of the health issues, an 2018 EPA study found out that Black people are exposed to 1.54 times more fine particulate matter than white people. And so, and obviously, so, and then from the Asthma and Allergy Foundation of America, they did a study and compared to white Americans, Black Americans are nearly 1.5 times more likely to have asthma and 3 times more likely to die from asthma. And improvements to insulation, air sealing, heating equipment, and ventilation can improve indoor air quality and alleviate a lot of the chronic illnesses that disproportionately impacts minority households. So this is where the Green New Deal comes in. And recently, Senator Sanders and Representative Ocasio-Cortez introduced a new Green Deal for Public Housing Act. This is this is the first time a major bill for environmental reform targeting public housing was put on the floor on Congress. So that's a great accomplishment. So the bill basically aims to invest $119 to $172 billion in green retrofits that include all needed capital repairs, vastly improved health, safety, and comfort, and eliminate carbon emissions. And it is estimated that this bill would improve the living conditions of nearly 2 million people living in roughly 1 million units. And the bill also aims to create up to 240,000 plus jobs per year nationally across multiple sectors, and also reduce annual carbon emissions by roughly 5.6 metric tons annually compared to recent years. President Biden also has put out his plan as well, called the Biden proposal. But his plan basically plans to invest $213 billion to produce, preserve, and retrofit more than 2 million affordable and sustainable places to live. And out of the $213 billion, his plan calls to invest $40 billion to improve the infrastructure of the public housing system in America, and also to establish a $27 billion clean energy and sustainability accelerator to mobilize private investment into distributing energy resources, retrofits of residential, commercial, and municipal buildings, and clean transportation. So these two proposals are great, and we hope that both of them do get passed. Sorry.
I am so sorry. I think I accidentally paused your speech. Can you unmute yourself?
Yeah.
Great, thank you.
Am I unmuted? Okay, great.
Yes,
No
you
problem.
are. Thank you.
No,
My apologies.
No, it happens. So yeah, we look forward, for these the Green New Deal and the Biden proposal to pass and be enacted soon. However, at the same time, both of these plans are subject to federal and legislative processes, and there is no guarantee of the funding and what is going to be included. And there's also no set date or timeline on when these will be enacted and when will start. So, any housing authorities interested in environmental reform should be looking at various options and resources that they have to start this process and address environmental reform until the bills are passed. And that's what we've been doing at HHA. So I'm going to step into what we've been doing in terms of tackling environmental reform and green energy. So many of you probably already know what EPC and ESCOs are, so brief overview of what they are. So EPC is basically an innovative financing technique that uses cost savings from reduced energy consumption to repay the cost of installing energy conservation measures. And then these EPCs are normally offered by what's called energy service companies, ESCOs. And this is an innovative financing technique that allows building users to achieve energy savings without upfront capital expenses. And some of the other advantages include the ability to use a single contractor to do necessary energy audits and retrofits, and to guarantee the energy savings from selected series of conservation measures. So why might a PHA enter into an EPC or use an ESCO? Multiple reasons depending on what their needs are, but some of the major reasons are so that PHAs can make capital energy improvements while preserving limited budget dollars, reduce utility expenses for the housing authority, but also for the residents living in public housing, reduce repair and maintenance costs caused by inadequate, aging, and obsolete equipment, modernize building operations, provide technical and operations training for building operating personnel, improve indoor air quality, create incentives for ESCOs to develop highly efficient projects by linking their compensation to project savings, and finally, conserve energy and water resources to improve the environment. So one of the principal advantages of using the EPC incentive is that the utility savings may be used in place of the capital funds to finance energy improvements at properties as well. So how we started was in 2014, the Houston Housing Authority was presented with the option and accepted the challenge to join the Better Buildings Challenge multifamily sector, which is a voluntary HUD initiative that asks multifamily properties to become energy efficient. And HHA was motivated to explore an energy performance contract, and we did an audit in 2015, which identified an opportunity to save us $1.8 million annually. So we've decided to enter into an EPC contract with Siemens Industry Incorporated, and our EPC construction portion was done in fall of 2017. And in the first year, we were able to save over $1.6 million in energy costs. So some of the improvements that we've made utilizing the ESCO, the first one we did was replace water heaters with new high efficiency units. We also replaced package units and split systems with new high efficient units throughout the common areas, installed new energy management control systems in common areas of 15 properties, installed new LED lights, improved building envelopes for many of our buildings, replaced stove burners to electric stove safety, T-burners, transformer upgrades to more efficient units, installation of emergency generators at 2 sites. This tremendously helped us during the winter storms that we experienced down here in Houston in February. Upgrade sites with irrigation controllers to a new weather Track Pro 3 web-based ET controllers. We also installed a rain water collection tank and system and made some domestic water improvements. So here are some pictures showing some of the work we did. So first picture is us installing new water heaters in our properties, replacing old HVAC units, putting in new ones, some LED lighting, installation of a water tank for the residents in the property to irrigate the community garden and water the lawn. And then also, finally, this is an additional bonus that we were able to hire 80+ individuals and get them participate in our Section 3 program. And many of them still do work part-time, full-time, and have, some have also transitioned out of public housing, which is a great accomplishment for us. So in year 3 in 2019, the performance contract agreement guaranteed $1.72 million in savings, and we were able to exceed that guaranteed savings by over $800,000. And then in the 3 years, we have our savings have accumulated a total of $6.6 million. And we have used these monies to make additional upgrades to our properties, install new HVAC, AC units, as well as do some other work as well, and also to pay off the ESCO debt. But outside those cost savings, we've also have been successful reducing CO2 and greenhouse emission through the usage of the ESCO agreement. And in year 3 alone, HHA was able to reduce our annual emissions by 6,024 metric tons of CO2, which is equivalent to emissions from an average American home for 695 years, or emissions from 1,301 passenger cars operated each year, and emissions from 14,010 barrels of oil consumed. And then break down each of the savings. or for each of the properties that we had. And as you can see, total, we've saved over $2.7 million, which has been the highest amount of savings that we've had, despite many of public housing residents staying at home using their utilities due to COVID. So this is a major accomplishment that we've had. And then I'm going to pass it off to Bill.
Okay, hello, everyone. Well, good job, Alan, describing the ESCO project, because we have really been excited with this project. It's far exceeded our expectations as far as energy savings go. The Housing Authority has been able to do a lot of things with the extra funds available to us from the savings of our energy. And one item we were able to do, which it was hurting us originally, was the fact that here in Texas, we can negotiate our utility price on the electrical side. Here we're deregulated, so therefore you can shop the lowest rate possible. Well, that was hurting us on our energy savings, because if we're shopping for a lower utility rate, the ESCO is based upon the frozen rolling base, which is the consumption that's frozen. You multiply that consumption times the utility rate, which we negotiated is lower. Well, that hurts us in the dollar amount that we're going to be receiving from HUD. So HUD's recognized that, and they've recognized that in using the rate reduction incentive, which we applied for. And so far, we've been very successful. Every year we applied for it is to receive it. In order to receive the rate reduction incentive, can you go to the next? I'll leave you there. Yeah. You have to pursue special and significant efforts beyond the EPCO and ESCO. So our special significant efforts are that when we negotiate our utilities, we make sure that it's all wind power energy here in Texas. So that was one significant event that approved it. The second one was the method that we use to procure our electric rate is called the reverse auction, which we use EMEX Energy. MX is the name of their company. And what they do is the Houston Housing Authority is a 24 megawatt load usage of all electricity. All of our aggregate properties together comes up to around 24 megawatts of electricity. MX will post that up on a board, and it allows all utility providers to bid against that amount. So everyone, it's almost like the draft. Everyone is bidding on our utility usage, and there's a clock. So if Constellation U Energy bids a price, the clock will get down close, and another energy provider will bid against Constellation, like someone like JEXA. And if JEXA's time runs out, CenterPoint or Reliant Energy will try to go lower than them. So it's very interesting to sit there and watch all these utility providers bid against each other, and ultimately we'll be able to decide what rate we're happy with. And just to give you an example, the last time we did that, we ended up with a 3.4 cent per kilowatt hour rate, which is very, very low. However, by using the rate reduction incentive from HUD, HUD says, okay, look, you got this low rate, but we will pay your consumption frozen rolling base based on your contract amount that you had with your ESCO, which was substantially higher. And you will be able to subtract the low rate from the contract rate, and we'll pay you for that additional, or that number times the consumption. And that goes on your 52722 form. And that's significantly increased our operating subsidy amounts. So other projects that we've been able to use with the savings that we get from the ESCO, there have been multiple properties that needed to upgrade their air conditioning units. We're able to use that money for that. We also partnered with our utility provider. They also provided a lot of grants to the Housing Authority because we're hard to reach, low income, nonprofit. Your utility providers have a lot of money available for items like that. They've increased our insulation in a couple of our properties at no charge. There's a direct install program where they'll come in and do window improvements. They'll do lighting and some of the water heater improvements, all at no charge at all. So we've been very fortunate to have the ability to partner with them and have won these grants multiple years. So that concludes Alan and I's presentation. Be glad to ask or answer any questions you might have. And It's been wonderful to join in this effort.
Yes,
Thank you.
and one more thing I would add is, so HHA has been and is in the process right now, going through the RAD process. So if anybody has any questions about, you going from public housing to RAD in terms of ESCO and EPC, we've gone through the process for one of our properties, and we're going through, the other processes for our other developments. So feel free to contact us anytime. Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Alan and Bill. You guys really demonstrated how these kind of projects can be environmentally friendly and create healthier communities for your residents. And yeah, it's good to see. Next up, we have Michelle Moore from NYCHA. And just a reminder, if anyone has any questions, please go ahead and enter them into the chat. We'll save them to the end.
Great. Can everybody see my screen and hear me?
Yes.
Good. Okay, great. So my name is Michelle Moore. I'm the director of NYCHA, the New York City Housing Authority's Recovery and Resilience Department. And today I'm going to be talking about our Superstorm Sandy recovery program. So the New York City Housing Authority is the largest landlord in North America. And we're really integral to the affordable housing plan for all of New York City. We make up about 8% of the housing stock in the city, which is especially important for our vulnerable populations. Many of our residents are elderly. Many of them are disabled, but we do have a large percentage of residents that are non-disabled, working age adults, and the average household income is about $23,000 a year. To give a sense of the scale of the Housing Authority, we make up about 175 million vertical square feet. And to put that in perspective, that's the equivalent of 58 One World Trade Centers. So we have properties in 5 different boroughs, consisting anywhere from 2 tenement-style buildings on the Lower East Side of Manhattan to 28 buildings sprawling across 40 acres out in Red Hook and Brooklyn. So our portfolio is diverse, and we have a lot of apartments to manage. So bringing us back to the program that I oversee, Superstorm Sandy was one of the most destructive climate events for New York City in the recent recent past. It's estimated that there was about $20 billion to the entire city. And our public housing authority properties are primarily located in these low-lying, flood-prone areas. And prior to this, we were not prepared for a storm the magnitude of Sandy. We saw our infrastructure and utility systems that were mostly located in the basements were completely wiped out. We had sand piled in some places up to 6 or 7 feet tall up against our buildings, covering access to our grounds. Our electrical systems were completely wiped out, and in some developments, we were without electric and heat for about 3 weeks. And if we think back to this time in 2012, Superstorm Sandy was in late October. We actually had a pretty significant snowstorm just a few days later. And that was really a difficult time for the Housing Authority, but it was also a time where our employees really came together and did our best to help recover those critical services as quickly as we could. So this is just a smaller map of New York City. Our Superstorm Sandy impacted developments, like I said, it's through 4 boroughs, about 35 different properties, consisting of over 200 buildings, 60,000 residents. And after some pretty tense negotiations with FEMA, we were able to secure over $3 billion in investment. $3 billion, that's the largest, that's the largest influx of funds into these developments since these developments were built. I'm going to give us a little bit of a history timeline here because we're in a little bit of a different boat from our counterparts in Houston and Puerto Rico. We're about 9 years out from this storm. So Superstorm Sandy hit in 2012. Our immediate attention after the storm was to really focus on restoring those critical services, cleaning up, debris removal, and really starting those negotiations and that intense documentation of what all the damages were. We were able to secure access to the $3 billion in December of 2015, so nearly 3 years after the storm. So a recovery is never quick, it's never easy, But we wanted to make sure that we were fighting for every dollar that we possibly could. Once we got access to that money, we started off designing and getting the design and AE firms on board so we could start these projects as soon as possible. In 2018, we started our first out of 35 projects and continued to spend down our $3 billion as quickly as we can. By 2019, we invested over $1.7 billion. We have construction underway currently at all of our projects, and about 7 of those projects are substantially complete at this point. And we're expecting to wrap up this program by the end of 2023. So during our negotiations, we really wanted to look at how do we protect these developments for the future? How do we not just replace equipment the way it was before Sandy, but how do we include mitigation efforts to protect these developments for the next generation of public housing residents in New York City? So we wanted to make sure if we were getting boilers replaced by FEMA, we were not going to put those back in the basement. So we really wanted to make sure that every single investment, we were spending every dollar twice and getting the most benefit out of it. So we focused our negotiations primarily around this scope of work, which is installing full backup power generators, new boilers, heat and hot water equipment, flood-proofing our buildings so that they can continue to be lived in by residents even on the first floor, making sure mechanical, electrical, and plumbing equipment is protected, roof replacements, site lighting, LED, new bright lights, CCTV cameras, and grounds restoration. And Superstorm Sandy was really a turning point for New York City. We never faced anything from a climate hazard like that. And it really changed the minds of a lot of our city leaders to really focus on this and make sure that leadership was on board with what we were doing. So that $3 billion that I was talking about, it was not an easy feat for us to get this money from FEMA. So when I talk about the $3 billion and how we got access to it in December 2015, it was a really long journey to get there. The first step of the process was first to come to an agreement of what FEMA was going to fund. This included inventories and site visits and assessments to look at the damage. Similar to Puerto Rico, we had difficulties coming to agreements with our insurance carriers as well. After we had an agreement about what the typical scope would be, we then had to come up with a conceptual design of how we would do it. That conceptual design went through a benefit cost analysis to make sure that what we were planning to do was cost effective for FEMA. From there, FEMA finally said, yes, we have faith in you. This scope makes sense. Give me some real designs. We started designing, and then that design had to go through another benefit cost analysis to make sure that a true design was actually cost effective yet again. From there, we finalized our designs and resubmitted them back to FEMA for a final scope alignment. So this process was onerous. This process was long, but it did ensure that FEMA was spending their money properly, appropriately, and was really focused on mitigation. So our $3 billion, about half of it is focused on recovery, so rebuilding what was actually damaged, and the other half is focused on mitigation and ensuring that we're installing things in a resilient way so that it does protect the equipment for the future. So our recovery, it was mostly the simple stuff. You had boilers that were damaged, they were going to replace them. Hot water heaters, playgrounds, site restoration, a really standard capital project for a housing authority. But what was atypical was the resilience efforts that the housing authority, and I'm going to be honest, New York City had never really looked at before. Surge protection, building reinforcement, and new infrastructure upgrades for equipment we didn't have was new to us and really was new to New York City. I'm going to dive a little bit into more detail there because this was some of the most challenging part of our program. So surge protection. Superstorm Sandy was a surge event. We had waters coming from the ocean, flooding our buildings in a very quick time period. So we pursued 2 different methods to protect our buildings. Wet flood proofing, which allows the water to pass through, and dry flood proofing, which is keeping the water out. So some of our buildings are 60, 70-year-old brick buildings that we were pretty much asked to turn into submarines. This was not an easy task and something we're still working through today. So the concept of dry flood proofing. If this was a typical NYCHA building, first we'd have to install backwater valves and sump pumps in the lower levels of the building. We'd have to reinforce the buildings to make sure they can withstand the pressure of oncoming water coming up towards the building. And then we have to make sure that we have barriers that for all the entrances, windows, and doorways that we would deploy about 48 hours prior to an anticipated hurricane. So this whole system makes up a dry flood proofing system. And this actually also allows the first floor to continue to be used. If we did not dry flood proof in this manner, we would have had to vacate all of the first floor apartments in our over 30 NYCHA developments, which would have been a tremendous impact to the affordable housing stock in New York City. So dry flood proofing, the idea sounds pretty simple, but it's a tremendous burden on the operational front for our NYCHA counterparts who have to actually deploy these systems for when a hurricane is expected to come. These are some images of our metal flood barriers that get deployed at the entrances when we have a storm coming. We haven't had to use them yet, but every year we have to have practice deployments to make sure all the equipment is there and is in good working order. This has been, very difficult to manage. This is, thousands and thousands of pieces of equipment that now needs to be stored on property, needs to be maintained, tested yearly. And if you see this picture on the right, we actually need to have stairs at the entrances to all these buildings to make sure that emergency personnel can get in and out of the buildings when there is an event and the waters do come up all the way to the building. If you remember that map I showed you, most of the developments, like I said, are located in low-lying, flood-prone areas right on the water. So like I said, the maintenance was very difficult. We did find some solutions to reduce the maintenance, such as automatic rising barriers, where the water actually, from the flood waters that come in, actually fill up a chamber underneath panels that are embedded in the ground. Kind of like safety barriers that you see at secure locations. Once that chamber fills up with water, the flood barriers automatically rise up to protect the building. In this location, it's in between these beige concrete blocks. That's where the flood barriers come. They're embedded in the ground. We have two other locations where we're actually changing the landscape of the developments to protect them from future storms. So at Baruch Houses on the Lower East Side, we're actually building a flood wall to protect half the campus so we don't have to have these flood barriers at all the entrances. At Red Hook, we're actually raising the entire grounds in the courtyards between the buildings. So it takes a longer time for waters to get all the way up to the buildings because we're physically raising the ground and changing the grade. So wet flood proofing, that other concept I had just spoken about. We're taking all the equipment out of the basements, elevating up either onto the roof or in a small annex building, and actually inviting the water to come into our building with flood-proof vents. This is a great solution because you don't have to worry about anything being damaged. You do have to pump the water out after the event, but it's very low maintenance. This is a picture on the Lower East Side where we've done this in a parking garage on one of our properties at a location called Two Bridges. So building reinforcement. We're, like I said before, these are 60, 70-year-old brick buildings that we're turning into submarines. We need to make sure that that hydrostatic pressure from oncoming floodwaters does not cause uplift of our slabs or damage to the building facades. So this picture on the left is actually an outside reinforcement. These are typically red brick buildings, so that white new facade that you see on there is actually part of our flood proofing strategy. We reinforce the buildings to give them an extra protection and to make sure water was not seeping in through the first floor. Some of our building reinforcement is done from the inside, where we reinforce the buildings with CMU block and concrete and apply a waterproofing layer in addition to that. So infrastructure upgrades, which is, infrastructure is a big word now. I know everybody is really excited about an upcoming infrastructure package. This is really installing new boilers, new heat and hot water systems, full backup power generators, and all of the other equipment that's critical to providing services to our residents. This is a picture out in Coney Island. Those white boxes on top of those 5 brick buildings are full backup power generators. These are some new buildings that we constructed throughout the city. These are meant to elevate critical equipment, mechanical, electrical, and plumbing that was in the basement, elevating it up to protect for future flood levels. All of this equipment that's critical for critical equipment such as heat, hot water, water, and electric, we have incorporated 2.5 feet of sea level rise on top of our design flood elevation. So that we're really building this stuff into the future. We're not protecting for the risk that's now, we're protecting for the risk that's into 2050, 2060, 2070. And then talking specifically about the boilers and hot water heaters, some of the equipment at these developments had a significant need even before Sandy. So the fact that we were able to secure new boilers and heat and hot water equipment was really a lifeline for the Housing Authority. We have over $40 billion in unmet needs in our last physical needs assessment. So this influx of capital from FEMA actually was a blessing in disguise. So we're 9 years out from Superstorm Sandy. Where is NYCHA right now? So of the $3.2 billion that we received, we have 3.12 already in contract and underway. Nearly $2 billion of that work is already complete, and we've made significant progress at these developments. Over 178 roofs have been replaced. We have new heat and hot water systems at 5 developments that are fully operational, serving 2,200 apartments. We have backup generators that are operational, and we're really making some significant progress. I'm going to do a short case study on my favorite NYCHA development, which is Coney Island Houses. This is a 5-building development in the Coney Island Peninsula. I put a little map here for those of you who are familiar with New York City or might need a quick refresher. It's right on the famous Coney Island Boardwalk. So while you're getting a hot dog at Nathan's and visiting the amusement park, you continue to walk down Surf Avenue until you get to Coney Island Houses. There's about 1,200 residents that live here, about 500 apartments. And this is one of the first developments that became to an agreement with FEMA on for funding. So in 2017, I'll give you a little bit of a personal story. I was 9 months pregnant with my child, and I was my first child, and I was really, really invested in starting this project before I left for maternity leave. So we actually had the groundbreaking the day that I decided I was going to have the baby. I went to the groundbreaking, left, and my husband brought me to the hospital that night. And my goal was to have that project started and then also to have it finished within 3.5 years. We're getting close to 4 years now. My daughter's birthday is in 2 weeks, and we are 99% done with that project. So this was something that was a project that we had Senator Schumer and other elected officials kind of stand on the Coney Island Boardwalk and helped pressure FEMA to help us close out negotiations with FEMA to make sure that we could do what we were planning at Coney Island Houses across the NYCHA portfolio. So this new boiler equipment, these are pictures of our newly installed boilers. They were just commissioned about 2 weeks ago. They're up and running, providing heat and hot water to those 1,200 residents that live there. And the old boilers used to be located in the basement, and the basements here, since they're on the boardwalk, were completely inundated and completely filled with water. We were not going to let that happen again. And this is a picture of our new boiler building that we constructed. We wanted to use this as an opportunity not just to build back better, we wanted to build back kind of in the best way we could. So this picture here, the top level of this building is where we have the boilers. The first floor is made into a new multi-purpose space that has not been programmed yet. We'll have a use for residents and other community members. And I have a little bit of a funny story here also. So when we first started designing this project, we had 2 locations that were viable for this new boiler plant. And anyone who works in government knows that when you take green space away, some people are not very pleased with that. So we wanted to make sure that the residents were engaged and invested in this project as much as we were. So we took those 2 viable locations to the residents, and we actually held a vote. There were 2 locations. One was on a green open space, and the other was on top of a senior citizen seating area. The senior citizen seating area was much more cost effective and a better construction solution to put this building. So we actually worked with the residents on a plan for if they were to allow us to take this space, what would the new seating area look like? And this is a direct result of that engagement with the residents. We wanted to make sure that they would love this building just as much as we have, and that they would truly be invested and not just think of the negativity of us taking their seating area. When we held the vote, they did vote for this location, and we were very happy that we were able to work with them on the resolution. The full backup power generators. This is something that was completely new to NYCHA. The only generators we had were some portable small generators for emergencies. And whenever you were using those, it was usually not a good sign. These are permanent generators that are up on the rooftop of Coney Island houses. They had to be lifted there with a crane, which required us to evacuate the top 2 floors of those buildings while we had crane operations. So we were very heavy on resident engagement to facilitate this work. And these generators are getting commissioned now, and they're the full load. So all apartments, AC units in the apartments, heat, hot water systems, everything will be fully powered. We're going to be using these generators also to enroll in demand response events. So the utility will actually pay us to turn these generators on to reduce the load in the neighborhood, to make sure that other property owners don't lose power during peak demand. Speaking of a new Green Deal, there's nothing greener than the roof at Coney Island houses. We were able to incorporate a green roof onto this new building. We really wanted to make sure, since we were taking some green space away, that we added some as well. We have the green roof, as well as some landscaping of resilient plantings that retain water and are meant to be on the waterfront. This may just look like a small building, not that important, but this building makes sure that residents have reliable heat, hot water, and electric, and that equipment is not at risk from being in the basement anymore. So this was really just meant to elevate everything up out of the basement, and we just needed some space to do so. And 5 of the 5 roofs have been fully replaced. Roof replacements are very important to NYCHA. We see that as one of the key ways to eliminate water intrusion into the buildings and mold into our apartments. So we were very pleased that we were able to negotiate roof replacement into our FEMA negotiations. I'm going to finish up now and just talk about where we are now and how we're engaging with the residents for the next part of our work. This is just an aerial image of Coney Island houses. And we were able to have 2 play areas funded by FEMA for restoration. And we wanted to make sure that the residents were involved in this as much as we were, because they were the ones who had to live through construction for the past 4 years. And we really want to make sure that their input is taken when we look at these new play areas. So we actually got 4 different options from our design firms, and we brought them to the residents. And the idea was, let's show you what the options are, and you give us your input on what you guys like. So we held, now that we're in the age of COVID, we actually held virtual workshops with the residents, and this is the equipment we came up for the first playground, which is focused on 2 to 5-year-olds. The next playground, which is for kids that are a little bit older. And then we actually gave them a choice of the color palette. So this is actually out for vote right now. So we don't yet know what the residents are going to select, but we thought it was really critical to get their input in this area. This is just a slide to get residents to vote. We had them vote via Zoom, we had an option to call in for those who could not access the Zoom vote. So we're just going to wrap this up here and just remind everybody that this was $3 billion of investment, but we still have $40 billion portfolio-wide for the Housing Authority that needs to be addressed. I think this program is a testament to that. When public housing authorities are funded properly, they can deliver these life-changing capital projects that we really invest in some of the most important populations in our cities, the people who drive our buses, teach at our schools, and make sure that the cities are what they are. I know we're going to move to questions, but it was a pleasure presenting here, and thank you for having me.
Thank you, Michelle, and thank you to all the presenters. It's really great to see that kind of innovation going to redevelopment projects. And all the presenters, I was starting to write down questions throughout the presentations, and then every time I was getting an answer for one of them. Again, if anyone has any questions, please feel free to enter them into the chat or unmute at any time. I guess do we still have Alejandro here? Alejandro?
Yes, I'm here, Joshua.
How you doing? So you briefly spoke about the Community Development Block Grant Disaster Recovery Grant Program. Could you talk about, I guess, a little bit of background to the program, and then how essential it is or how beneficial it's been to Puerto Rico on these recovery efforts you're going through, and maybe any kind of improvements you might want to see in the program?
Yeah, certainly. The CDBG DR program is being administered by the Department of Housing. We have received an initial allocation of around 3.5 billion for the DR. We have recently received the grant and the allocation of around 8 billion of MIT grant funds. So definitely in PHA as an example, we are using DR funds, like I said, to fund certain gaps for our new developments. CDBG-DR certainly has a lot of other programs that have certainly helped Puerto Rico as in economic development. We have home buyers grant program funds. We have funds for SBA funds. We have the reconstruction of houses that has an allocation of approximately $800 million that is being used to either repair or relocate those who their houses or homes have been affected or were affected by Hurricane Maria. So certainly there are various programs that are in place right now and that are being used by the people of Puerto Rico to be able to recover from the impact of the hurricanes Irma and Maria.
Great, thank you, Alejandro. Michelle, you spoke about the portfolio you're going through with NYCHA to do the redevelopment. How many more projects are still at risk to flooding in the NYCHA portfolio that you need to redevelop in the future, or do these kind of flood mitigation practices or implementations? And how can a Green New Deal for public housing really help with that initiative?
Sure. So we were fortunate that Superstorm Sandy was so destructive. It took out a large chunk of the developments that are at risk, but we still do have a significant amount of the portfolio. I'm not sure if the number off the top of my head that is still at risk. But in this process, we're actually developing a climate adaptation plan to make sure that all of our capital projects are screened before we invest any general HUD dollars in the properties to look at the risks. Right now, we have four new heating plant upgrades that are about to begin that were actually funded by New York State that are going to be elevated up out of those basements in new buildings. So following the best practices of this program to make sure that they're protected for future storms and sea level rise. So we still have a need. Primarily, we see that protecting the critical infrastructure, the heat, the hot water, and the electrical systems are what we would be focusing on as we move into the future to really just make sure that these developments can continue to be habitated. We don't necessarily see a funding that will be available for kind of full backup power generators and flood proofing on the scale that we did here, but we're continuing to pursue mitigation programs through FEMA and other sources. But a Green New Deal really would be kind of a lifeline for the housing authority. We have developments that are at risk for all sorts of climate hazards, not just flood. Heat is the number one factor right now of risk for New York City. There are people every year that die from heat events, and these developments, like I said, are 60, 70 years old. We don't have central air in them. People are relying on their own air conditioning units. So that's something we actually have a proposal in with FEMA through our Building Resilient Infrastructure and Communities program. But we're hoping with a Green New Deal, we can have more access to those types of funds to do those types of innovative projects.
Great. And Alan and Bill, you briefly brought up the project that you guys did at the end where you paired ESCO and RAD. Would you want to talk about that?
Yeah, sure. So in 2019, we started the RAD conversion process, obviously, and then last year in September, we successfully converted 2 of our public housing into one RAD development. So unfortunately, when you convert ESCO to RAD, right? What PHAs can do is they can either pay off the EPC debt or assume the debt and continue making, EPC debt payment after the conversion to a RAD. However, despite losing the EPC incentives, though, with the conversion RAD, housing authorities are able to add both the resident paid utilities and the rate reduction incentive to their RAD chat at the time of conversion. So, and properties will still benefit from all the energy efficient upgrades in their units and developments. So it may help out in the long run as well, going through the RAD process. Despite losing, the ESCO benefits, it might help in the long run financially with RAD conversions of ESCO.
Very good. Right, and just a reminder to everyone listening, please feel free to unmute if you have any questions to ask one of the presenters, or again, you can enter a question into the chat. I know that NYC or NYCHA and Puerto Rico, and I'm positive Houston has dealt with issues with FEMA and getting funding and also insurance around flooding. If everyone, please feel free to chime in whenever you want. This question, everyone, what kind of measures could be taken to make those processes easier and to really get the funding necessary to have the kind of resilient communities we would all hope to see? Alejandro, you can start. Or anyone who would like to answer the question.
I'd like to speak on, well, it sounds like, Michelle, you guys helped us out tremendously with Superstorm Sandy. Evidently that set the bar for FEMA, because we had Tropical Storm Harvey, if you recall. It really flooded the city of Houston, and then FEMA comes along and tells us, I believe it was a 428 program that Superstorm Sandy created, where you can design, you get your engineers and they design ways to mitigate the flooding. However, you can use those funds to go purchase affordable housing somewhere else to replace that particular property that was affected. Did NYCHA take advantage of that situation? Do you recall?
Sure. So we participated in the 428 program. I think we were probably one of the first large-scale 428 grants. We didn't purchase any alternate housing, but we did use this as an opportunity to kind of get innovative with our designs. So that boiler building that you saw, we had to meet all of our FEMA requirements, but we just built it back in a way that remained in our budget for FEMA so that we could meet our requirements, but get a nicer end product. So just kind of to your point, so yes, we were able to, that process I went through in my presentation of all the different steps was part of the 428 program. And being able to have a little bit more wiggle room and flexibility with the funding did make it easier to spend. We didn't have to, replace in kind. We didn't have to do things in a kind of a cookie cutter way in a traditional program. But I'd say there are some risks to the 428 programs because it's a fixed grant. So if something doesn't go your way, you can't go back to FEMA and ask for more money. So there's definitely pros and cons. Right. We're a big advocate of the 428 program, and that's really interesting to hear that you used it in that way.
And could either of you or any of you want to speak on how important resident engagement is on this process of recovery and redevelopment? I know, Michelle, you briefly spoke about, interactions and communication on various projects.
Sure. For NYCHA, resident engagement is kind of ingrained in everything we do. We actually had set up a team of community outreach individuals. We made sure that at least half of them actually were residents of the NYCHA developments that we worked in, to make sure that we could be getting the message out to residents so they can understand what's happening after Superstorm Sandy, how is NYCHA and the government trying to make sure that our equipment is built back and that we're getting all the services we need. And then actually that team evolved into a construction facilitation team because, like I said, putting those generators up on the roofs required us to vacate the top 2 floors of those buildings. So flyering, phone banking, holding in-person meetings, lobby meetings, just getting residents understanding what was happening with the construction was really critical to us moving things forward. And I think, were we perfect at it? I don't think so. I think we learned a lot of lessons that are going to help the Housing Authority as we move forward with additional capital projects. Just one example, sometimes we were trying to get input from residents, but we were only getting it from a subset of residents. So then we started changing the times of our meetings, holding them at different times so we can get different populations. And COVID actually gave us a lot of lessons learned. All of our Zoom meetings, we actually post up on our website. So it allows more people to access the information than someone who can only be there on a Thursday at 6 o'clock for a resident meeting. So it was critical. And I think we have a lot of lessons learned.
Joshua, I have to agree with Michelle. Certainly, resident engagement is critical to recovery efforts. In our case, our residents were there since the first moment, since the moment of the events, helping us to manage and administer Puerto Rico shelters, to working in their communities, to be able to debris removal, etc. So definitely it's crucial that resident engagement. Also, it's something to deal with. In our case, unfortunately, we haven't been able to receive FEMA funding to be able to start with the repairs of our housing inventory. Like I mentioned in my presentation, we have just received 5 projects that have been obligated, 2 of those being for the relocation of 2 public housing developments in Ciales that suffer extreme damages due to flooding. And definitely the resident engagement is crucial also for that relocation process. Being able to relocate 2 communities to another site is definitely a challenge. It's something we are currently working on. And we definitely hope we continue to develop the resident engagement in our future projects.
Yeah, so from Houston as well, we concur with what Alejandro and Michelle said. One of the biggest issues or problems that we've had with Harvey was the relocation process as well. And we're still, struggling to bring people back to our newly built developments because of just, the tracking. It's just really difficult for us to track where people went after Harvey. Fortunately, we finally got the city to fund some of our project. Well, one of our major projects, 2100 Memorial, which is an all senior building. But so hopefully we can get that done. But then, outside of that, just communication and a good plan. For example, right, the winter storm that happened in February, like we never expected it to happen. So it's always it's always important to have that conversation internally, but also with the residents. And educate them and provide them the necessary resources so that they know what to do when an unexpected emergency or emergencies come up. And it was also more challenging because of COVID. So we had to restructure and reorganize and rewrite a lot of our plans, our safety plans, so that we maintain social distancing as well, on top of emergency evacuations and working on other emergency related stuff.
Thank you, Alan. So it looks like we made it to 4 o'clock. So I just want to thank everyone for attending this session and for the presenters, Michelle Moore from NYCHA, Alan Issa and Bill Bryan from the Houston Housing Authority, and Alejandro Salgado from the Puerto Rico Public Housing Authority. So thank you all for attending. And as you can see, we have a slide right here. There's a networking session that begins right after this. Please feel free to join. There's a link in the chat, and there's the instructions right there on the slide. Anything else, Camille? Nope.
No, thank you everyone for joining us today. I hope to see you in a few minutes at the networking event.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you, everyone.